Betrayed by her ex, she married a passing beggar, unaware he's a disguised billionaire. After losing everything to the man she trusted most, a heartbroken woman does something unthinkable. She marries a stranger she met on a rainy night, a man with nothing but torn shoes and kind eyes. But when she brings him home, strange things start to happen. Her bakery is suddenly saved, opportunities appear from nowhere, and the man who had nothing seems to know powerful people no beggar ever should. As her ex returns to destroy her again, she begins to wonder, who is this quiet man she married? When the truth comes out, it will change everything she thought she knew about love, faith, and second chances. Was he really sent by God to heal her heart, or to test it? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The gentle hum of gospel music filled the pre-dawn darkness as Renee Carter's fingers worked methodically through the soft dough on her well-worn wooden counter. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. She sang softly, her rich voice barely above a whisper in the quiet kitchen of Sweet Grace Breads. The familiar motions of kneading brought comfort as she watched the first hints of sunrise paint the savannah sky in gentle pinks and purples through her bakery's front window. At 4:30 in the morning, the world still slept. But Renee found peace in these solitary moments. The steady rhythm of her hands working the dough matched the beating of her heart as she thought about Derek. A smile touched her lips as she imagined him walking through the door later, his portfolio tucked under his arm, ready to share their dreams of the restaurant they would build together. The yeast-scented air wrapped around her like a warm embrace as she shaped loaves and set them to rise. Her grandmother had taught her that bread needed patience and love to turn out right, and Renee poured both into every batch she made. The wooden floors creaked beneath her feet as she moved between the industrial mixer and the proofing cabinet, her movements as natural as breathing after years of practice. Morning light gradually filled the small bakery, highlighting the worn but spotless surfaces and the collection of Bible verses she'd carefully written on small cards pinned to the bulletin board. The timer chimed, and Renee pulled out a tray of golden croissants, their buttery aroma filling the space. Her phone buzzed just as she finished arranging the morning's first display. The bank's number flashed on the screen, making her heart skip a beat. "Hello, this is Renee Carter," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Ms. Carter, I'm calling about your small business loan application." The banker said, "I'm pleased to inform you that it's been approved." Renee's free hand flew to her mouth as tears of joy welled in her eyes. Thank you so much," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. This was it, the chance she and Derek had been waiting for. Her fingers shook as she tried to call him right after, but his phone went straight to voicemail. "Baby, call me as soon as you can," she said, excitement bubbling in her voice. "I have amazing news." Unable to contain herself, she decided to surprise him at his apartment. The morning rush was over, and her assistant could handle things for an hour. She grabbed her purse and car keys, practically floating out the door. But when she reached Derek's place, something felt wrong. The parking spot where his cherished black Mercedes usually sat was empty. Renee climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, her heels clicking against the concrete steps. Her knock echoed in the quiet hallway. No answer. Using the spare key he'd given her, she opened the door to find the apartment stripped bare. The furniture was gone. The closets stood empty. Even the photos of them together had vanished from the walls, leaving only faint rectangles where they'd once hung. Confusion turned to worry as she pulled out her phone again. Still no answer from Derek. With trembling fingers, she opened social media, hoping for some clue about what was happening. The first post she saw made her blood run cold. There on her screen was Derek, handsome in a crisp tuxedo, beaming at the camera. Beside him stood her cousin Candace, resplendent in white lace, holding a bouquet of cream roses. The caption read, "Just married, starting our new life together in Charleston." The phone slipped from Renee's numb fingers, clattering to the floor. She stumbled backward, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. The timestamp showed the photos were posted just hours ago. Back at the bakery, she moved like a sleepwalker, barely aware of her surroundings. The rich smell of cinnamon rolls baking should have been comforting, but it only turned her stomach. As she reached for the oven door, her hand brushed against the hot metal. Sharp pain shot through her palm, but it was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. She crumpled to the floor, tears streaming down her face as the smell of burning sugar filled the air. The cinnamon rolls, forgotten in her distress, turned black in the oven. The acrid smoke matched the bitterness rising in her throat. Hours passed in a blur. She barely registered closing the bakery early, her burned hand throbbing beneath a hastily applied bandage. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered over Savannah, matching her mood. The first drops of rain began to fall as she got into her car. She drove aimlessly along the coastal road, her windshield wipers keeping time with her ragged breathing. The rain grew heavier, sheets of water obscuring her view of the marsh grasses swaying in the wind. But she couldn't stop driving, couldn't face going home to an empty apartment filled with wedding plans and broken promises. "I'm done," she whispered, her voice rough from crying. "I'm done being anybody's fool." The words echoed in the car's interior, mixing with the sound of rain against metal. "I'm done," she repeated, gripping the steering wheel tighter as tears continued to fall. The grey ocean stretched endlessly to her right, its waves matching the turbulent emotions in her chest. Each mile she drove took her further from the bakery, from the apartment where she'd planned her future, from the life she thought she was going to have. But she couldn't outrun the pain, couldn't escape the humiliation of knowing that while she'd been building their dreams, Derek had been planning his escape with her own cousin. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating her tear-stained face in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, lost, betrayed, broken. But underneath the pain, a spark of her grandmother's steel showed in her eyes. The same determination that had helped her build sweet grey spreads from nothing still burned, even if it was buried beneath layers of hurt. Rain continued to fall as Renee drove through the gathering darkness, each rotation of her wheels carrying her further from the life she thought she knew, from the man she thought she loved, from the cousin who had betrayed her trust. The only sound was the steady drum of raindrops and her quiet mantra. "I'm done being anybody's fool. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done." The thunder rolled across the darkening sky like angry drums, making Renee's small car feel even more vulnerable on the rain-slicked coastal road. Her headlights caught the neon sign of May's Coastal Diner through the sheets of rain, a beacon of warmth in the growing storm. With her nerves frayed and her stomach empty, she guided her car into the nearly deserted parking lot. The diner's fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the chrome and red vinyl interior. A bell tinkled weakly as she pushed open the door, bringing with her the smell of rain and sea air. Only 3 other people occupied the space. A weary-looking waitress wiping down the counter, an elderly man nursing a coffee in a corner booth, and a tall figure sitting alone at the counter. Renee's attention was drawn to the man at the counter. His clothes were worn, jeans frayed at the edges, flannel shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly too long, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But what caught her attention wasn't his appearance, it was what he was doing. With careful dignity, he was eating leftover food from a recently vacated place setting. The waitress approached him with a coffee pot. "You sure I can't get you something fresh from the kitchen, honey?" His response surprised Renee with its gentle politeness. "No, thank you, Mom. This is more than enough. I appreciate your kindness." His voice was soft but clear, carrying an educated tone that seemed at odds with his appearance. Something about his quiet dignity touched something in Renee. Perhaps it was the raw emotional state she was in, or maybe it was the way he held himself, humble, but not broken. Without really thinking it through, she found herself sliding onto the stool next to him. "The meatloaf special is pretty good here," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I'd be honored if you'd join me for dinner." He looked up, and Renee found herself caught in the most honest pair of eyes she'd ever seen. They were a warm brown, filled with both wisdom and wariness. "That's very kind," he said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Please," Renee insisted, something in her needing to do this one kind thing on this horrible day. "I'm Renee Carter, and I could really use the company." He seemed to study her for a moment before nodding. "Eli," he said simply. "Just Eli." As the waitress brought menus, Renee noticed how Eli handled his with careful hands, as if it were something precious. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he agreed, his eyes scanning the menu prices before setting it down. "I've been traveling, looking for honest work. Been on the road for quite a while now." "Family?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A shadow passed across his face. No family to return to. His words were simple, but carried weight. Maybe it was the storm outside, or the emotional exhaustion of the day, or something in Eli's quiet presence. But Renee found herself talking. Words poured out about Derek, about the betrayal, about the years wasted on someone who could so easily throw away their future. "Men who lie," she said bitterly, pushing a half-eaten meatloaf around her plate. "They put on a good show, make you believe in their promises, then reveal themselves when it's too late." Eli was quiet for so long that Renee thought he hadn't heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but carried a depth that made her really listen. "Not every man lies," he said, looking down at his worn hands. "Some just don't look rich enough to matter." The words hit Renee like a physical blow. They stung with truth. Hadn't she just spent years believing in Derek's smooth talk and expensive suits? But they also offered an odd comfort, suggesting that genuine worth might exist in unexpected places. When the check came, Renee reached for it automatically. Eli's protest was immediate but gentle. "Please, you've already shown more kindness than I deserve." "Let me do this," Renee insisted, thinking of her grandmother's words about helping others even when your own heart was hurting. "Please." He fell silent, but the look he gave her was full of genuine gratitude, as if she'd offered him far more than a simple meal. It made her wonder about his story, about what had brought this clearly educated man to eating leftovers in a coastal diner. The storm had intensified while they ate, the rain coming down in heavy sheets. "There's a bus stop about 5 miles down the road," Eli mentioned, looking out at the darkness with resignation. Renee found herself speaking before she'd fully thought it through. "I can give you a ride." When he hesitated, she added, "It's no trouble, really." She could see the internal struggle play across his face, pride warring with practicality as lightning illuminated the parking lot. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you," he said, and those two words carried the weight of real gratitude. As they walked to her car, Renee noticed how Eli kept a respectful distance, his movements careful and deliberate. He waited for her to unlock the doors, then settled into the passenger seat with the same quiet dignity he'd shown in the diner. His only possession seemed to be a worn backpack that he held carefully in his lap. The rain drummed on the car roof, creating a cozy bubble of isolation from the world outside. Despite her usual caution about strangers, Renee found herself feeling oddly peaceful. Perhaps it was because after a day of having her world turned upside down, here was someone who seemed to be exactly what he appeared to be. No pretense, no deception. They drove in comfortable silence, the windshield wipers keeping time with the storm. Eli sat quietly, his presence neither threatening nor demanding, just there. It struck Renee that this was the first time all day she hadn't felt the need to either cry or scream. Instead, she felt something else, a tiny spark of faith in human goodness that she thought had been completely extinguished by Derek's betrayal. The simple act of helping someone else, of connecting with another human being who asked nothing more than simple dignity, had somehow begun to heal something inside her. It wasn't much, just a small crack in the wall of pain and betrayal, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in a steady rhythm as Renee's car cut through the darkness. Rain pelted against the metal roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder. Renee's eyes were swollen and tired from crying, and she blinked hard to keep focused on the wet road ahead. That's when she heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from the passenger seat. The tune was hauntingly familiar, and it took her a moment to place it. "Amazing Grace," she whispered, her voice catching. "My father used to sing that." Eli's humming paused. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." "No," Renee said quickly, wiping at a fresh tear. It's nice. Daddy used to sing it every Sunday morning while making breakfast. He passed away when I was 15. The humming resumed, softer now, and something about it felt like a balm to her raw emotions. The simple melody brought back memories of Sunday mornings filled with pancakes and laughter, of her father's strong hands showing her how to knead bread dough, of simpler times when love felt uncomplicated and sure. They approached a gas station, its fluorescent lights creating a hazy glow in the rain. Renee pulled under the flickering canopy, needing a moment to collect herself. The engine idled quietly as rain drummed on the roof. "You know what's crazy?" she said suddenly, letting out a bitter laugh. "I spent 5 years planning a future with someone I thought I knew. Maybe I should just marry a stranger instead. Couldn't hurt worse than what I had." The words tumbled out, half joke and half despair. "Then marry me." Renee turned to look at Eli, expecting to see him smiling at her poor attempt at humor, but his expression was serious, his eyes steady and calm in the flickering light. She let out a nervous laugh. "That's not funny." "I'm not trying to be funny." His voice was quiet but firm. "If love can't start with money, maybe it can start with kindness." The rain fell harder, creating a curtain of water around the car. Renee stared at him, trying to make sense of what was happening. This morning, she'd been engaged to a man she thought she knew. Now she sat in a car with a stranger who'd just proposed marriage. "You don't know me," she said weakly. "I know you paid for a stranger's dinner without judgment. I know you offered a ride to someone most people wouldn't look at twice. I know you have a good heart that's hurting right now." He paused, then added softly, "And I know what it's like to have trust broken by someone you loved." Something in his voice, in the raw honesty of his words, made Renee's heart skip a beat. The practical part of her mind screamed that this was crazy, reckless, possibly dangerous. But another part, the part that was tired of careful planning and sensible choices that had led nowhere, whispered that maybe, just maybe, This was exactly what she needed. "Why would you want to marry me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because in one evening, you've shown more genuine kindness than I've seen in years." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not offering romance or promises of eternal love. I'm offering honesty, respect, and a fresh start for both of us." The night stretched on as they sat in the parked car, talking. Eli told her about his own experiences with betrayal, though he kept the details vague. Renee shared stories about her grandmother, her bakery, her dreams. They talked about faith, about second chances, about the difference between love and trust. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, they found themselves parked in front of a small roadside chapel. The wooden sign read, "Grace Chapel, all welcome," in faded paint. An older couple emerged from the connected house, Pastor Joseph and his wife Mabel, as they introduced themselves. Mabel took one look at Renee's tear-stained face and Eli's worn clothes and immediately invited them in for coffee. The small kitchen was warm and smelled of cinnamon, reminding Renee of her own bakery. "Marriage isn't something to rush into," Pastor Joseph said gently after hearing their story. His kind eyes studied them both. "We know it's unconventional," Eli replied, his voice steady. "But sometimes God works in unexpected ways." Mabel, who had been quietly observing while serving coffee and homemade biscuits, suddenly spoke up. "Joseph, do you remember how we met?" The pastor's face softened. "At a bus station. You were running away from home. And you were a seminary student who offered me shelter with your aunt until I could figure things out." Mabel turned to Renee and Eli. "Sometimes the craziest decisions are the ones God uses to show us his path." The little chapel was simple, but beautiful, with morning light filtering through stained glass windows. Mabel had picked fresh flowers from her garden for Renee to hold, and she'd insisted on lending Renee a delicate lace handkerchief as something borrowed. Renee's hands trembled as she stood before the altar. Her simple black dress, the one she'd worn to what should have been a celebration dinner with Derek, now served as her wedding gown. Eli stood beside her, his worn clothes somehow looking dignified in the chapel's soft light. Pastor Joseph's voice was strong and clear as he began the ceremony. Mabel and the chapel's elderly groundskeeper served as witnesses, their faces full of hopeful anticipation. "Marriage," Pastor Joseph said, "is a leap of faith. It's trusting that God can take two separate paths and weave them into one. Sometimes that weaving looks different than we expect." When it came time for the vows, Eli's voice was steady and sure. "I, Elijah, take you, Renee, to be my wife. I promise to be honest, faithful, and kind, to respect you, support you, and walk beside you in whatever path God leads us." Renee's voice shook slightly as she repeated her vows, but grew stronger with each word. The simple gold bands that Pastor Joseph provided, kept for emergency weddings, Mabel explained, felt cool and strange on their fingers. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Joseph declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The morning sun broke through the clouds just then, sending rainbow-colored light dancing across the chapel floor. Mabel dabbed at her eyes with her apron, while the old groundskeeper clapped softly. Eli's kiss was gentle and brief, more a seal of their promise than a romantic gesture. Yet something about it, the tenderness, the respect, made Renee's heart flutter in a way that all of Derek's passionate kisses never had. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of May's Country Kitchen, a well-worn diner just down the road from the chapel. The bell above the door chimed as Renee and Eli entered, still adjusting to the weight of their rings and the reality of what they'd just done. The vinyl booth squeaked as they settled in, a tired waitress named Carol bringing them menus and coffee without being asked. The breakfast rush was over, leaving the diner nearly empty except for a couple of truck drivers at the counter. Renee stared at her menu without really seeing it, her mind still spinning from the events of the past 24 hours. Eli sat quietly across from her, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug as if savoring its heat. "Thank you," he said softly, breaking the silence. "For trusting a beggar." Renee looked up, meeting his eyes. There was something in them, a depth of gratitude that made her both uncomfortable and oddly at peace. "You're not—" she started, then paused. "I mean, I don't think of you that way." Carol returned to take their orders. Eggs and grits for Renee, a full breakfast plate for Eli. As she walked away, Renee noticed how Eli's shoulders had relaxed slightly, as if the promise of a real meal had eased some invisible burden. "I worked construction once upon a time," he said, answering the unspoken question in her eyes. "Had my own crew even. Lost it all a few years back when—" He trailed off, taking another sip of coffee. "Well, let's just say I learned the hard way that trust is precious currency." Renee nodded, understanding all too well. The food arrived, steam rising from their plates into the cool morning air. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the simple act of sharing a meal creating a bridge between their separate worlds of pain. "Listen," Renee said finally, pushing her empty plate aside. "I have a spare room above my bakery in Savannah. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and private. You could stay there while you look for work." The words surprised her even as she spoke them, but they felt right. Eli's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition if we're married," Renee said, trying to smile despite the strangeness of those words. "Besides, I could use some help around the bakery. Do you know anything about fixing old ovens?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I might know a thing or two." The drive back to Savannah was quiet but not uncomfortable. Renee pointed out landmarks along the way. The old lighthouse, the bridge where locals fished for shrimp, the church where her grandmother still sang in the choir. Eli listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest. It was late afternoon when they pulled up behind Sweet Grace Breads. The brick building stood 3 stories tall, with the bakery occupying the ground floor and 2 small apartments above. Faded gold lettering on the windows spelled out the shop's name, along with Estro 2019, a reminder of better days. "It's not much," Renee said as she unlocked the back door, "but it's home." The familiar scent of yeast and sugar enveloped them as they entered. Renee flipped on the lights, illuminating the industrial kitchen with its well-used equipment. A stack of unpaid bills sat on her desk in the corner, their edges curling in the humidity. "This was supposed to be our dream," she said, quietly, running her hand along a flour-dusted counter. "Derek and me. We were going to turn it into a full restaurant. Had the plans drawn up and everything." Her voice caught. "Then he married my cousin Candace instead. Apparently her daddy's money was more appealing than my hard work." Eli's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with anger on her behalf. "Some men," he said carefully, "mistake gold for value. They end up with empty wealth instead of real treasure." Renee showed him upstairs to the spare room. It was small but neat, with a single bed and a window overlooking the alley. "Bathrooms down the hall. The water takes a minute to get hot, but it works fine." "It's perfect," Eli said sincerely. "Thank you." Later that evening, after showing him around the rest of the bakery and explaining about the temperamental old oven that needed constant adjusting, Renee found herself in her kitchen making dinner. The simple act of cooking, cornbread in her grandmother's cast-iron skillet, beef stew simmering on the stove, helped settle her nerves. Eli set the table without being asked, moving with quiet efficiency. When they sat down to eat, he bowed his head in prayer. "Lord," he said softly, "thank you for this food, this shelter, and for bringing me to someone who sees people as you do, with kindness and grace. Help me to be worthy of such trust. Amen. The stew was simple, but filling. The cornbread warm and fragrant. They talked about small things, favorite foods, childhood memories, funny stories about customers. For the first time in weeks, Renee felt herself truly relaxing, the knot of anxiety in her chest loosening slightly. After dinner, Eli insisted on washing the dishes while Renee packed away the leftovers. Through the window, she could see stars appearing in the darkening sky. The day's events felt almost dreamlike now. Had she really married a stranger? Yet watching Eli's careful handling of her grandmother's old dishes, there was something solid and real about his presence that anchored her. When they said goodnight, standing awkwardly in the hallway between their rooms, Eli touched her hand briefly. "Thank you," he said again, "for everything." Renee nodded, unable to find the right words. As she closed her bedroom door, she heard him moving quietly in the spare room, then the soft sound of his voice in prayer. The words were too muffled to make out, but something about knowing he was praying, for her, for them, for whatever lay ahead, brought an unexpected peace to her troubled heart. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky when Renee woke to an unfamiliar sound. Clinking and rustling drifted up from downstairs, making her heart skip until she remembered. Eli, her husband of exactly 1 day. She pulled on her robe and crept down the stairs, following the noise to her kitchen. There stood Eli, tools spread across the counter as he worked under her sink. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked with old scars. "Good morning," he said without looking up, somehow sensing her presence. "Hope I didn't wake you. This pipe's been dripping something fierce." "How did you know it was leaking?" Renee asked, still blinking sleep from her eyes. "Heard it last night while doing dishes." He emerged from under the sink, wiping his hands on a rag. "Already swept the floors too. Figure it's the least I can do." The kitchen floor did look cleaner than it had in months. Even the windows seemed to sparkle in the early morning light. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. "I wanted to." His smile was gentle but firm. Besides, idle hands never helped anyone. As they prepared for the day's baking, Renee found herself stealing glances at this strange man who had entered her life. He moved with purpose, learning the kitchen's layout quickly and anticipating her needs before she could voice them. When the first customers arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, the shop practically glowed with warmth. Fresh bread filled the display cases, and the scent of cinnamon rolls wafted through the air. Eli stayed mostly in the background, but his presence seemed to fill the space with quiet strength. Mrs. Henderson, a regular who'd been coming in since opening day, paused while picking up her usual sourdough. "Something's different today, Renee. The place feels brighter somehow." Throughout the morning, similar comments trickled in. People noticed the gleaming counters, the organized shelves, the peaceful atmosphere. Even Mr. Johnson, who rarely smiled, seemed more cheerful as he collected his daily baguette. Eli greeted everyone with the same gentle politeness he'd shown at the diner, though Renee noticed how he subtly turned away whenever someone raised a phone for pictures of the display case. He had a way of blending into the background just as cameras appeared, like a shadow slipping behind sunlight. The week passed in a blur of shared meals and quiet conversations. Eli proved to be skilled at minor repairs, fixing not just the sink, but also a wobbly table and the temperamental back door that always stuck in humid weather. Each morning, Renee would wake to find some small task completed, some burden lifted from her shoulders. But on Thursday afternoon, everything changed. The bank's number flashed on her phone screen, and Renee's stomach dropped before she even answered. "Ms. Carter?" The banker's voice was apologetic but firm. We've discovered some irregularities in your loan application. There appears to be a clause that Mr. Malone added without proper authorization. Renee's hands began to shake. What kind of clause? One that ties the loan to his personal guarantee. Since he's no longer involved in the business. The banker cleared his throat. I'm sorry, but unless alternative arrangements can be made, we may have to revoke the loan. The phone slipped from Renee's grip, clattering onto the counter. Eli appeared at her side, steady hands catching her as her knees buckled. What is it? He asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew. Through tears, she explained about Derek's final betrayal, how he'd apparently forged documents to ensure the loan would fall through without him. I'll lose everything, she whispered. The bakery, my dream, all of it. Eli's face hardened for just a moment before softening into determination. No, he said firmly. You won't lose anything. Sometimes God sends help in unexpected ways. He guided her to a chair, pressing a glass of water into her hands. Promise me you won't give up. How can I not? The bank… Let me handle a few things, he said, his voice carrying an odd note of authority she hadn't heard before. Just keep baking, keep believing. Can you do that? Something in his tone made her nod, despite her fears. That night, after Renee had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, Eli slipped quietly down the stairs and out the back door. The alley was dark and quiet, lit only by a single street lamp and the stars above. He pulled out a phone, not the basic flip phone he'd shown Renee, but a sleek smartphone that had been hidden in his worn jacket's inner pocket. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, dialing a number from memory. When he spoke, his voice was different, the humble, soft-spoken tone replaced by one of quiet power and absolute authority. Yes, it's me, he said, glancing up at Renee's darkened window. I'll need the Turner Foundation to make a small, quiet investment in a bakery on Broad Street. He listened for a moment, then continued with crisp efficiency. Use the usual channels. Everything needs to look completely legitimate. No traces back to me. And Marcus? This needs to happen fast. After ending the call, Eli stood for a long moment in the quiet alley. Above him, the stars sparkled in the clear Georgia night, witnesses to his secret. She'll never know, he whispered, his voice once again gentle. The words floated up towards the heavens like a prayer, or perhaps a promise. In the darkness, a slight smile crossed his face, not the hesitant one he usually wore, but something more confident, more knowing. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the expression faded back into his carefully maintained, humble demeanor. He slipped the smartphone back into its hiding place and quietly returned upstairs, his footsteps as soft as his secrets. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh bread through sweet grace as Renee checked her email one last time before closing. Her eyes widened at the subject line. Urgent catering request. Veterans Appreciation Luncheon. This can't be right, she muttered, clicking the message open. The details made her heart race. An order for 200 people, full payment offered up front, to be delivered in 3 days. Eli! She called out. He appeared from the storage room, dust on his worn jacket. Did you know anything about this? He studied the email over her shoulder, his expression innocent. Looks like a blessing to me. But I never applied for any catering jobs. I wouldn't even know where to start with an order this big. Eli's eyes crinkled at the corners. Maybe someone tasted your bread and spread the word. You do make the best sourdough in Savannah. She narrowed her eyes at him suspiciously, but his face remained pleasantly blank. Well, I can't turn down an order this size. The deposit alone would cover next month's rent, but… She bit her lip. I'll need help. Good thing you've got a husband who knows his way around a kitchen, Eli said, already rolling up his sleeves. They worked through that night, and the next too, in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Eli proved skilled at following recipes exactly, measuring ingredients with careful precision, while Renee handled the artistry of shaping loaves and creating delicate pastries. They moved around each other in the small kitchen as if they'd been doing it for years. During quiet moments, while waiting for dough to rise, they shared stories. Renee told him about learning to bake from her grandmother, about the day she'd first opened Sweet Grace. Eli listened intently, asking questions that showed he truly cared about understanding her journey. On the morning of the luncheon, they loaded Renee's old delivery van with stacks of fresh bread, pastries, and sandwich platters. The Veterans Hall was a modest building with flags flying proud out front. As they set up the buffet tables, Eli seemed to know exactly where everything should go. "You sure you've never done this before?" Renee asked, watching him arrange the display with military precision. He shrugged. "Just seems logical is all." The event began, and Renee's nerves melted away as she watched elderly veterans' faces light up at the sight of her food. One after another, they came to thank her personally. "Reminds me of my mama's cooking," said one gentleman with silver hair and a chest full of medals. "Best bread I've had since Paris, 1965, declared another, his weathered face creased with joy. Throughout it all, Eli stayed in the background, quietly refilling platters and cleaning up spills. But Renee noticed how he straightened to attention whenever a veteran passed by, how he listened to their stories with genuine respect. The drive home that evening was filled with a comfortable warmth. The radio played old gospel songs, Amazing Grace, How Great Thou Art. And to Renee's surprise, Eli knew every word. His voice was rich and deep, blending perfectly with hers as they sang along. Looking at him in the golden light of sunset, Renee felt something shift in her heart. The way his strong hands gripped the steering wheel, how his face softened when he sang about grace and redemption, it stirred something she thought had died with Derek's betrayal. "Thank you," she said softly when the song ended. "For everything. I couldn't have done this without my Mr. Fix-It." Eli laughed then, a real, full laugh that transformed his whole face. It was the first time she'd heard it, and the sound made her heart skip a beat. "Is that my new nickname? Well, you did fix the sink, the table, the door, and now my catering crisis. Seems fitting." His laughter faded to a gentle smile. "I'm just grateful I can help." The next morning, Pastor Joseph stopped by the bakery, his kind face beaming. He accepted a fresh cinnamon roll and sat at the counter, watching Renee work. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've performed hundreds of weddings over the years, some fancy, some simple, but there's something special about yours." Renee felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Pastor, we barely knew each other." Sometimes God's hand moves in unexpected ways. He took a bite of his roll and closed his eyes in appreciation. "I've been praying for you both, and I feel in my spirit that this union was divine timing." "But how can you be sure?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Look at the fruits," he said simply. "Your business is growing, you're smiling again. And that man?" He nodded toward where Eli was carefully wrapping bread for a customer. "He looks at you like you hung the moon." Renee's heart fluttered. She'd noticed those looks, the way Eli's eyes followed her movements, how his face softened whenever she entered a room. It was so different from Derek's showy affection. Eli's love, and yes, she was beginning to think it might be love, was quiet, steady, shown in actions more than words. "I think," she said slowly, "I might be falling for him." Pastor Joseph patted her hand. "That's not such a bad thing, child. Sometimes the best love stories don't start with fireworks. Sometimes they start with simple kindness." She watched Eli thank the customer with his usual gentle politeness. When he turned and caught her looking, his smile was warm enough to melt away the last of her doubts. The pastor was right. This didn't feel like her whirlwind romance with Derek. It felt deeper, more real, like coming home to a place she didn't even know she was looking for. As Pastor Joseph prepared to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Keep trusting, Renee. God's not finished writing your story yet." She nodded, her heart full of a hope she hadn't dared to feel in months. Later, as she worked beside Eli in comfortable silence, she found herself humming one of the gospel songs from their drive. He joined in softly, and their voices blended just as naturally as their lives were beginning to do. Sweet Grace Breads hummed with life as the morning sun streamed through the windows. The line stretched out the door, with customers eagerly waiting for Renee's famous cinnamon rolls and crusty sourdough. The tiny bell above the door chimed constantly as people flowed in and out. "I've never seen it this busy," Renee whispered to Eli as she pulled another tray of golden brown loaves from the oven. Her face glowed, with a sheen of perspiration and pride. Eli smiled from where he was boxing pastries. "Word gets around when something's special." As if to prove his point, a woman in a crisp blazer entered, notepad in hand. "Miss Carter, I'm Sarah Mitchell from the Savannah Morning News. Would you have a moment to talk?" Renee wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. "I'm quite busy right now, but maybe after closing." "Perfect," Sarah said, her eyes bright with interest. "Your story's been making waves in the community. A woman who turned heartbreak into hope. That's exactly what people need to hear right now." Later that afternoon, as the last customers trickled out, Sarah settled at a corner table with Renee. Eli busied himself with cleaning, trying to fade into the background. "So tell me how it all began," Sarah prompted, recorder ready. Renee took a deep breath. "Well, I started this place with nothing but faith and my grandmother's recipes. Then when everything fell apart with my ex-fiancé..." She shared the story of Derek's betrayal, her voice growing stronger as she described how she'd refused to let it break her. "Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes," she said, glancing at Eli. "Speaking of changes," Sarah said, following her gaze, "I understand you recently married?" Eli tensed slightly, continuing to wipe down tables. "Yes." Renee smiled. "Eli's been a blessing I never expected. He helps with everything, from fixing leaky pipes to serving customers." "Could we get a photo of you both?" Sarah asked, pulling out her camera. "Oh, I don't." Eli started backing away. "Please?" Renee asked softly. "You're part of this story too." Something in her eyes made him pause. Slowly he nodded, though he kept his face partially turned away as Sarah snapped the picture. The article ran the following week. "The bakery that gives hope" spread across the front page of the lifestyle section, accompanied by photos of Renee's bright smile and carefully crafted breads. The story detailed her journey from betrayal to success, emphasizing how she'd built not just a business, but a place where kindness was served daily alongside fresh-baked goods. The response was immediate. By 9 o'clock that morning, the line wrapped around the block. People clutched copies of the newspaper, pointing to the photos and story as they waited. "My daughter's going through a divorce," one woman told Renee as she bought a loaf of bread. "Your story gave her hope." "I drove from Charleston just to try your cinnamon rolls," another customer said, "but I'm staying for the atmosphere of love you've created here." By closing time, Renee was exhausted but happy. She was counting the register when Eli appeared with a mysterious smile. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." He led her up the narrow stairs to the roof, and Renee gasped. String lights twinkled overhead, creating a magical glow. A checkered blanket lay spread out, laden, with sandwiches, fresh fruit, and what looked like her own peach pie. "When did you do all this?" "During your afternoon break." He admitted, "I thought you deserved something special." They settled on the blanket, the warm summer breeze carrying the scent of jasmine from a nearby garden. As they ate, Renee noticed something different in Eli's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Can I tell you something?" he asked quietly. "Of course." Seeing that article today, it brought back memories. He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I used to own a large company, built it from the ground up, just like you did with this place. But people I trusted, my partners, my fiancé, they got greedy, took everything." Renee reached for his hand, feeling the roughness of his palms against her fingers. "Is that why you're careful about pictures?" He nodded. "For a long time, I wandered, trying to figure out who I was without all the trappings of success. Then I met this amazing woman who showed kindness to a stranger." His words trailed off as he looked at her, eyes full of something that made her heart race. "Maybe," she said softly. "God stripped us both down to what matters, so we could find what's real." In the distance, fireworks suddenly burst across the sky, probably from a baseball game at the nearby stadium. The colors reflected in Eli's eyes as he leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, like a question being asked and answered all at once. When they pulled apart, Renee rested her head on his shoulder, watching the sparks fade into the night sky. The string lights danced above them, and somewhere below, the bakery held all their hopes for tomorrow. But right now, in this moment, everything that mattered was right here on this rooftop. Two hearts learning to trust again, finding strength in each other's brokenness made beautiful. The fireworks continued their distant celebration, but the real magic was in the quiet space between them, where love was rising like bread in the oven, slow, steady, and sure. The morning sun cast golden light through the bakery windows as Eli balanced precariously on a ladder, tool belt slung low around his hips. The old wooden sign that read, "Sweet Grace Breads," had been hanging crooked for months, its letters fading in the Georgia heat. "Just a little more to the left," Renee called from below, squinting up at him. "Like this?" Eli adjusted the sign carefully, his movements precise despite his weathered clothes. "Perfect!" She beamed, watching him secure the final bolt. The sign now hung straight and proud, freshly painted letters gleaming. Inside, Mabel Whitman bustled around the kitchen, organizing day-old bread into baskets. Her grey hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her floral apron had flower handprints all over it. "Now, these go to the shelter on Pine Street," she instructed, marking each basket with careful notes. "And these 3 are for the families behind on rent in my husband's congregation." Eli climbed down from the ladder and joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. "I can deliver those on my way to fix Mrs. Johnson's screen door," he offered. "You're a blessing, both of you," Mabel said, patting Renee's cheek. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing you two together." The bell above the door chimed as customers filtered in, drawn by the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee. Renee watched Eli interact with them. His gentle manner, the way he remembered everyone's names and their usual orders. Sometimes she caught him staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes full of something that made her heart skip. Across town, in a sleek, high-rise apartment, Candace Harper Malone's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the newspaper spread before her. The lifestyle section featured a large photo of Sweet Grace Breads, with Renee's smiling face prominently displayed. Can you believe this?" She spat, shoving the paper toward her husband, Derek. She's actually succeeding after everything. And who is this mysterious new husband of hers? Derek Malone leaned forward, studying the partially obscured figure in the background of the photo. Something about the man's stance seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. A beggar. Candace continued, her voice dripping with disdain. She married some homeless drifter she met on the road. It's pathetic, really. Wait, Derek said, grabbing the paper for a closer look. Something's not right here. No one goes from sleeping in shelters to running a successful business in weeks. He has to be hiding something. Candace's perfectly lined lips curved into a cruel smile. Then maybe we should find out what it is. After all, we're just looking out for my dear cousin's best interests, aren't we? Meanwhile, in a private office downtown, Eli sat across from his long-time attorney, speaking in hushed tones. Everything's arranged through the Shell Corporation, the lawyer assured him. The building purchase will be completed by the end of the week. Ms. Carter won't face any threat of foreclosure. Good. Eli nodded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to making million-dollar decisions. And the paperwork for the small business grant? The Turner Foundation's donation will appear to come through normal channels. No one will trace it back to you. That evening, after closing time, Eli sat alone in the small apartment above the bakery. Moonlight filtered through the window as he pulled out expensive stationery, a remnant of his other life. His pen hovered over the paper as he struggled to find the right words. "Dear Renee," he began, his handwriting careful and precise. "There's something I need to tell you. My name isn't just Eli, it's Elijah Turner. Yes, that Turner, the one who founded Turner Enterprises and the Turner Foundation." The words flowed onto the page, his past, his wealth, his reasons for hiding it all. He explained about his ex-fiancée's betrayal, his need to find someone who would love him for himself, not his money. He wrote about falling in love with Renee's kindness, her strength, her genuine heart. "I never meant to deceive you," he wrote. "I just needed to know if real love was possible without wealth clouding everything. Please understand." When he finished, he read it over twice, then carefully folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The weight of it felt heavy against his chest. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he would tell her everything, face to face, and pray she could forgive him. In the bakery below, Renee hummed as she prepared dough for the next morning, unaware of the forces gathering around her. Derek and Candace's plotting, Eli's secret protection, and the truth that waited in his pocket like a time bomb ready to explode. The rest of the week passed in a blur of activity. Mabel's free bread basket program grew, touching more lives than anyone expected. People started leaving notes on the bakery's bulletin board, stories of hope, of kindness received and passed on. "You've created something special here," Eli told Renee one evening as they closed up together. "We created it." She corrected him, reaching for his hand. "I never thought I could trust anyone again after Derek, but you've shown me what real partnership looks like." The guilt in Eli's chest tightened. He touched the letter in his pocket, wondering if he was about to lose everything that mattered by telling the truth. But looking into Renee's honest eyes, he knew she deserved nothing less. Across town, Candace and Derek sat in their expensive car, watching the bakery from a distance. "I've hired a private investigator," Derek announced. "By this time next week, we'll know exactly who this fraud really is." Candace smiled, imagining Renee's face when a perfect little world came crashing down. "And then we'll make sure everyone knows what a fool she's been." But they couldn't see inside the bakery, where Eli helped Renee wipe down counters, their movements in perfect sync. They couldn't see how he steadied her when she stumbled, or how she reached up to brush flour from his beard. They couldn't see the way love had grown between them, quiet and strong as rising bread. As night fell over Savannah, the letter waited in Eli's pocket while stars appeared one by one above the old bakery sign. Tomorrow, he thought again. Tomorrow he would find the courage to tell her everything. For now, he watched her count the day's receipts, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows. Whatever came next, he would remember her just like this, beautifully, perfectly herself. The morning sun streamed through the bakery windows as Renee hummed softly, arranging pastries for the charity event. Her fingers moved with practiced grace, creating delicate flower patterns with powdered sugar on the fresh-baked croissants. The Veterans Support Foundation's annual fundraiser was her biggest catering job yet, and she wanted everything to be perfect. "These look amazing," Eli said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. His touch still made her heart flutter, even after these weeks together. "I just hope everything goes smoothly," Renee replied, leaning back against him. "There'll be so many important people there." "They'll love you," he assured her, though she noticed a slight tension in his voice. He'd been acting strange lately, almost nervous, especially when she mentioned the event. Across town, in their luxury penthouse, Candace Harper Malone scrolled through her phone with a satisfied smirk. "Derek, come look at what the investigator found." Her husband moved to peer over her shoulder, his expensive cologne filling the air. "Well, well," he chuckled. "Looks like Renee's knight in shining armor has quite a few secrets." "She'll be humiliated," Candace said, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the screen. "It's what she deserves for thinking she could rise above her station." The afternoon of the event arrived warm and bright. The grand ballroom of the Savannah Historical Society sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant table settings. Renee's display of pastries and breads drew admiring looks from the well-dressed crowd. "Everything looks wonderful, dear," Mabel said, squeezing Renee's hand. The pastor's wife had come to support her, sensing something special about this day. Eli stood quietly nearby, helping arrange the food but keeping to the shadows. His worn clothes, which usually seemed comfortable and honest to Renee, looked starkly out of place among the suits and evening dresses. The event began smoothly. Veterans and their families praised Renee's baking, several asking for her business card. She felt proud, successful, until she noticed Candace moving through the crowd like a shark circling its prey. Her cousin wore an emerald green cocktail dress that probably cost more than Renee's monthly rent. Derek followed close behind, his smile sharp and predatory. They stopped to chat with various guests, their voices just loud enough for Renee to catch snippets. "Oh yes, my dear cousin's new husband," Candace was saying to a group of society women. "Quite the interesting story, actually. Did you know he was living on the streets when she found him?" The women's eyes widened, their jewelry catching the light as they turned to stare at Eli. Phones appeared in hands, snapping quick photos. "I heard he's been spotted eating leftovers from diner plates," another guest whispered loudly. "Can you imagine?" Heat crept up Renee's neck as more people turned to look. She glanced at Eli, who had gone very still, his face pale. Candace's voice cut through the growing murmurs. "It's really quite sad. My cousin has such a soft heart. She'll take in any stray that comes along. But to actually marry a vagrant? And now he's pretending to be something he's not." Camera flashes popped like lightning around them. Renee's vision blurred with tears as she saw phones pointing their way, heard the whispers growing louder. The beautiful moment she'd worked so hard for was crumbling around her. "Renee." Eli reached for her, but she jerked away. Is it true?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Have you been lying to me this whole time?" "No, yes, it's complicated." He stumbled over the words. "Please, let me explain." But the hurt was too fresh, too familiar. First Derek, now Eli, men who had seemed so genuine until their lies were exposed. She turned and ran, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the calls behind her. The evening air hit her face as she burst out onto the street. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she heard footsteps following. "Renee, wait!" Eli caught up to her, his face anguished. "Please, just listen." "Listen to what?" she cried, whirling to face him. "More lies! More stories! I trusted you! I let you into my life, my home, my heart! And you've been pretending all along!" "I wanted you to love me for who I was before you ever saw what I have," he said softly, his eyes pleading. The words hit her like a physical blow. "What you have? What does that even mean?" She shook her head, fresh tears falling. "You should have told me the truth. Whatever it was, you should have trusted me with it." Before he could respond, she turned and ran to her car, slamming the door behind her. Through the window, she saw him standing there, shoulders slumped, looking more lost than the day she'd first met him. That night, while Renee lay crying in her bed above the bakery, Eli moved quietly through the darkened kitchen. He packed his few belongings into the same worn backpack he'd carried that first night. His hand shook as he wrote a final note, explaining everything, his real identity, his wealth, his reasons for hiding it all. But as he placed the note on the counter, it caught a draft from the overhead fan. The paper slipped silently beneath the counter, disappearing into the shadows where Renee would never see it. Eli paused at the door, looking back at the bakery that had become more home to him than any mansion ever had. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness. Then he stepped out into the night, leaving behind the only real love he'd ever known. Upstairs, Renee clutched her pillow, her tears finally running dry. The hurt felt different this time, deeper, more raw. Because somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she'd given Eli not just her trust, but her heart. The bakery stood quiet in the Savannah night, holding its secrets. Below the counter, the unseen note waited, its words of truth and love hidden in the darkness, while two hearts broke in the silence of misunderstanding. The morning sun crept through the bakery windows, casting long shadows across empty tables where customers should have been. Renee stood alone in her kitchen, her hands covered in flour but lacking their usual purpose. The silence felt wrong. No quiet humming from Eli as he swept the floor, no gentle footsteps on the creaking boards above. She picked up a rolling pin, remembering how he'd fixed its loose handle last week. Every corner of the bakery held memories of him now. The newly repaired sink that no longer dripped, the fresh paint on the window frames, the string lights on the roof where they'd shared their first kiss. The morning rush never came. A few regulars trickled in, their eyes full of questions they were too polite to ask. Mrs. Johnson, who usually ordered a dozen muffins for her church group, took only 2 today. "We're praying for you, honey," she said softly, pressing Renee's hand. Around 10 o'clock, the local news played on the small TV she kept near the register. Renee's heart clenched as Candace's perfectly coiffed face filled the screen, Derek standing proudly beside her. "We're so excited to announce the grand opening of Malone's Fine Dining." Candace beamed at the camera. "Our vision is to bring true sophistication to Savannah's restaurant scene." Derek nodded, his practiced smile never reaching his eyes. "Unlike some simpler establishments, we believe in excellence at every level." The camera panned across their gleaming new restaurant with its crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Renee's hands trembled as she wiped down her worn countertop, remembering her own dreams of expansion that now seemed foolish. The bell above the door chimed, and her landlord, Mr. Peterson, walked in. His face was apologetic but firm as he handed her an envelope. "I'm sorry, Renee," he said, shuffling his feet. "But with the missed payments and the current situation, well, you'll find the eviction notice inside. You have 30 days. She took the envelope with numb fingers, watching him leave. The paper felt heavy in her hands, the weight of another dream crumbling. The afternoon dragged by. She threw away more burned batches than she sold, her mind wandering to Eli's face that night at the charity event. Had there been truth in his eyes when he tried to explain, or was she just desperate to believe in someone again? Around 4 o'clock, Pastor Joseph's familiar figure appeared in the doorway. His kind eyes took in the empty tables, the untouched display cases, the slump in Renee's shoulders. "Mind if I join you for some tea?" he asked gently. She nodded, grateful for the company. They sat at her favorite corner table, where the afternoon light made patterns on the wall. Pastor Joseph stirred his tea thoughtfully. "You know," he began, "when my Sarah left this world, I was angry at God, couldn't understand his plan, but sometimes our greatest blessings come wrapped in heartbreak." Renee stared into her cup. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Pastor. Every time I trust someone—" "The right man won't take your light, Renee." He interrupted softly. "He'll build around it, like a gardener tending a flower, not blocking its sun but protecting it from the storm." "But how can I know?" she whispered. "Eli kept so many secrets." Pastor Joseph set down his cup. "Did he ever take anything from you? Or did he only give?" The question caught her off guard. She thought of the fixed sink, the veterans' luncheon, the way business had mysteriously improved. Even when he left, he'd taken nothing but his backpack. "Sometimes," Pastor Joseph continued, "people carry secrets not to deceive, but because they're afraid. Afraid they won't be loved for who they really are." Evening fell, bringing with it a gentle rain that tapped against the windows. Renee sat in her favorite chair upstairs, watching water trail down the glass. The bakery below was dark and quiet, like her heart. "If I was wrong, Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "show me before it's too late." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and she pulled her grandmother's old quilt tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere in the city was Eli watching the same rain. Did he regret his secrets as much as she regretted her quick judgment? The day's pain settled heavy in her chest. The smug faces of Derek and Candace, the eviction notice burning a hole in her drawer, the hollow spaces where Eli should have been. But underneath it all, a quiet voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't heard his whole truth. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the roof where they'd once shared pie under string lights. In the streak of lightning across the sky, Renee saw her own reflection in the window, tired, hurt, but somehow still standing. Like her grandmother always said, sometimes God has to empty your hands before he can fill them with something better. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, letting the rhythm of the rain wash over her. The bakery might be failing, her heart might be broken, but something in Pastor Joseph's words had planted a seed of hope. Perhaps there was more to Eli's story than she'd allowed herself to hear that night. The official letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its courthouse seal glinting in the sunlight that streamed through the bakery windows. Renee's hands shook as she opened it, though she already knew what it would say. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp. She pressed her palm against the cool counter where she'd kneaded countless loaves of bread, letting memories wash over her. This place had been more than just a business. It had been her sanctuary, her dream, her offering of love to the community. "Well," she whispered to the empty bakery, If this is my last night here, we're going out with Grace. She tied on her apron and began pulling ingredients from the shelves. Flour dusted the air as she measured and mixed, her movements precise despite her heavy heart. The familiar scent of yeast filled the kitchen as she started batch after batch of her signature breads, crusty, sourdough, soft honey wheat, warm cinnamon swirl. Through the night, she baked as if possessed by holy fire. When one oven was full, she filled another. When counter space ran out, she cleared more. The moon traced its path across the sky as she worked, and still the ovens hummed. Around 3 a.m, Mrs. Johnson from next door knocked on the back door, worried about the lights still burning. "Child, what are you doing up at this hour?" she asked, pulling her robe tighter. Renee handed her a still warm loaf of banana bread. "Making memories, Mrs. Johnson, and sharing what I can while I still can." The older woman's eyes filled with tears as she understood. "Oh, honey." "Take some for your grandkids, too," Renee insisted, packing up more loaves. "And maybe some for that nice family that moved in downstairs from you." As dawn approached, she began arranging bread into baskets and bags. When the first hints of morning painted the sky pink, she started her deliveries. She left bread on doorsteps like precious gifts, rang bells and handed warm loaves to sleepy neighbors, filled the local shelter's kitchen with enough bread to feed their people for days. To each person who answered their door, she gave not just bread, but a piece of her heart. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd lost his wife last spring, received her special rosemary loaf. "For remembrance," she said softly, and he hugged her like a daughter. The Williams kids, always running wild before school, stopped in their tracks when she handed them fresh cinnamon rolls. "Miss Renee," they chorused, sticky fingers already reaching. "Now don't forget to share," she reminded them, though she'd packed enough for seconds. Their mother appeared in the doorway, concern in her eyes. "We heard about the auction, Renee. It isn't right, after all you've done for this neighborhood." Renee just smiled, though her heart ached. Sometimes God closes doors so he can open better ones. Back at the bakery, she changed into the simple blue dress she'd worn when she married Eli. It felt like years ago instead of weeks, but the fabric still held the memory of hope she'd felt that morning. She touched the worn counter one last time, remembering how Eli had fixed its wobble without being asked. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, "for being my dream for as long as you were." The walk downtown felt like a funeral march, but people kept stopping her. The homeless man she'd fed every Tuesday pressed a wilted flower into her hand. "You never made me feel less than human," he said. Mrs. Chen from the laundromat rushed out to hug her. "Your bread helped me feed my children when business was bad," she said in her broken English. "God bless you, Miss Renee." A group of veterans who'd attended her catering event spotted her and called out warm greetings. "Best cornbread this side of heaven," one declared, tipping his hat. Each encounter straightened her spine a little more, lifted her chin higher. By the time she reached the courthouse steps, she was walking tall. These people's love was worth more than any bank account, their gratitude more precious than any business loan. The courthouse lobby was cool and echoing, her heels clicking against marble as she followed the signs to Auction Room B. She smoothed her dress, touched the small cross at her neck, and took a deep breath. "Lord," she prayed silently, "whatever happens in that room, help me face it with grace." The door felt heavy under her hand as she pushed it open, ready to face whatever came next with the dignity her grandmother had taught her and the faith that had carried her this far. The auction room was smaller than Renee expected, with dark wood panels and rows of uncomfortable chairs. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. She chose a seat near the back, clutching her small purse like a shield. A mix of real estate developers, investors, and curious onlookers filled the other seats. The air felt heavy with the scent of coffee and cologne. Renee recognized a few faces from the local business community. People who'd smiled at her in Chamber of Commerce meetings, but never bought her bread. The auctioneer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today for the foreclosure auction of property located at 322 Broad Street, currently operating as Sweet Grace Breads." Renee's throat tightened. Hearing her beloved bakery reduced to a property number made her heart ache. She closed her eyes, remembering the day she'd first unlocked those doors, how she'd danced around the empty space, dreaming of what it could become. "Opening bid starts at $100,000. The auctioneer announced, his voice echoing in the hushed room. "100,000. Called a voice Renee recognized. Mr. Patterson from the development company that had been trying to buy up the whole block. 125. Counted another bidder. The numbers climbed slowly. 150,000, 175,000, 200,000. Each increase felt like another nail in the coffin of her dreams. Renee's hands trembled in her lap as she watched years of hard work being valued and measured in cold dollars and cents. 250,000. Mr. Patterson said firmly, looking around the room with satisfaction. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 250,000 going once. 500,000. The voice cut through the room like a thunderclap. Deep, confident, familiar in a way that made Renee's heart stop. The crowd gasped and turned as one. There, standing in the doorway, was Eli. But not the Eli she knew. Gone were the worn clothes and unshaven face. This man wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than her monthly revenue. His face was clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, shoes gleaming with the kind of polish that spoke of wealth and power. "Mr. Elijah Turner," the auctioneer said, his voice filled with sudden respect. "Welcome, sir." Renee's hands flew to her mouth. Elijah Turner. The name hit her like a physical blow. Everyone knew that name, the billionaire whose foundation built community kitchens and food banks across the country. The man who disappeared from public life years ago, leading to endless speculation in the business press. The man she'd married in a little chapel on a rainy night. The room buzzed with whispers. Phones appeared as people tried to sneak photos. Elijah, ignored them all, his eyes fixed on Renee's face. She couldn't look away, couldn't process the truth unfolding before her. Mr. Patterson recovered first. 525,000. He counted, though his voice wavered. $1 million. Elijah's voice was calm, as though he were ordering coffee instead of betting a fortune. The crowd's whispers turned to open murmurs. Someone dropped their phone with a clatter. Mr. Patterson's face turned red, then white, as he slumped back in his chair. The auctioneer's gavel trembled slightly. $1 million going once, going twice. Elijah stepped forward, his presence filling the room. "This woman," he said, his voice carrying to every corner, "fed me when I was hungry. She saw worth in a stranger who had nothing to offer but gratitude. Today I return the favor." Renee's vision blurred with tears. She remembered that night in the diner, how he'd thanked her for a simple meal, as though she'd given him the world. How he'd fixed her sink and swept her floors and prayed over shared meals. How he'd looked at her like she was precious when she felt worthless. The room fell silent, holding its collective breath. Even the auctioneer seemed caught in the moment, his gavel suspended in midair. $1 million, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Sold to Mr. Elijah Turner." The gavel fell with a crack that echoed like destiny. Renee sat frozen in her chair as people began filing out, stealing glances at both her and Elijah. Her mind raced with memories, his gentle hands kneading dough beside her, his quiet prayers, the way he'd hidden from cameras. Of course he had hidden from cameras. He was one of the most famous businessmen in the country. She watched as he signed papers at the front of the room, his movements precise and practiced. This was a man who could buy and sell companies without blinking, who ran a global foundation, who had more wealth than she could imagine. And he had chosen to come into her life as a beggar, eating leftover food in a roadside diner. Sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps as Renee pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the bright afternoon. Her mind whirled with questions, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. The warm Georgia air wrapped around her like a blanket, but she barely felt it. Behind her, she heard his measured footsteps, not Eli's shuffling gait anymore, but Elijah Turner's confident stride. She turned to face him, tears threatening to spill over. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why did you lie to me?" Elijah stood before her, the sunlight catching the silver at his temples. His expensive suit couldn't hide the gentle man she'd known these past weeks, the one who'd swept her floors and fixed her sink, who'd prayed over burned cookies and hummed hymns while washing dishes. "I didn't lie about who I am," he said softly. "I just didn't tell you everything I have." "That's still lying, Elijah." His full name felt strange on her tongue. "All this time you let me think—" Her voice caught. "I fed you scraps. I worried about you sleeping in that tiny room upstairs. She pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed. Elijah stepped closer, his shadow falling across her feet. "I needed to know," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I needed to find someone who could see past all this." He gestured at his suit, at the sleek car waiting by the curb with a driver standing at attention. "Do you know what it's like?" He continued. "To never know if someone loves you or your bank account. To wonder if every smile, every kind word is just another attempt to get close to your money?" Renee lowered her hands, really looking at him now. The pain in his eyes was raw, real. The same pain she'd glimpsed that first night in the diner. "I lost everything once," he said. "Not my money, my trust, my fiancé, my business partners. They all betrayed me, used me. I couldn't do it again. I couldn't risk—" He swallowed hard. "I couldn't risk falling in love with someone who only wanted what I could give them." "So you came to my bakery as a beggar?" Renee's voice trembled between anger and understanding. "I came to your bakery as myself, just stripped of everything else." He ran a hand through his hair, such a familiar gesture now. "And then I met you. You gave me food without expecting anything in return. You offered kindness to a stranger. You worked so hard, loved so deeply, even after being hurt." Tears rolled down Renee's cheeks as she remembered those first days, his gentle presence, his willing hands, his quiet strength. "I fell in love with your grace," he said softly. "Your strength, the way you give pieces of your heart with every loaf of bread. I watched you pray over that dough like it was sacred, watched you feed people who couldn't pay because you believed in dignity more than dollars." A sob caught in her throat. "But you could have told me. After we married, you should have trusted me." "You're right." His voice cracked. "I was afraid. Every day I fell more in love with the way you looked at me, like I was worth something just for being me. I was terrified of seeing that change." "I didn't need your money, Elijah," Renee said softly, wiping her tears. "Just your truth." He nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then that's all I'll ever give you now. No more secrets, no more hiding." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, starting with this. With trembling fingers, Renee opened it. Inside was the deed to her bakery, but not just any deed. This one had her name on it, only her name. "You've owned this in every way that matters," he whispered. "The love you pour into it, the hope you serve with every meal, that's worth more than any amount of money I could bid." She stared at the paper, her vision blurring. All those nights worrying about loans, about losing everything she'd built. And here it was, secured in her hands. Not as a gift from a wealthy man, but as recognition of what she'd already created. "The Veterans Luncheon," she said suddenly. "The catering company." A small smile tugged at his lips. "I may have made a few calls, but they hired you because your food was exceptional, because you treated those men and women with respect and kindness." "And the foundation investment?" "The Turner Foundation invests in people who feed their communities with more than just bread." His eyes held hers. "You were qualified long before you met me." Renee looked down at the deed again, then back at the man standing before her. This strange combination of the humble worker who'd swept her floors and the powerful businessman who'd just spent $1 million to save her dream. "I don't know how to reconcile these two men," she admitted. "They're both me." He said simply, "The man who fixed your sink is the same man who runs the foundation. The one who prayed over our meals is the same one who signs the checks. I just needed you to know the heart before you saw the wallet." The truth of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. She remembered his calloused hands kneading dough, his quiet prayers, his gentle encouragement when she wanted to give up. Those things hadn't changed with his revelation. They were the core of who he was. The sunlight caught his wedding ring as he reached for her hand. It was the same simple band from that night in the chapel. No expensive replacement, no upgrade to match his wealth. Just the honest symbol of a promise made between two hearts. "I'm still just Eli," he said softly. "Still the man who falls asleep, humming hymns, and burns the toast every morning. Still the one who thanks God for every moment with you. The only difference is now you know my full name." The summer breeze carried the scent of fresh bread through the newly painted windows of Hope Cafe. Renee stood in the doorway, watching the morning light spill across polished wooden floors that Eli had restored by hand. The walls, once cracked and water-stained, now gleamed with warm cream paint and held framed photos of smiling faces, the women who'd found new beginnings here. "Miss Jackie, that's perfect," Renee called out to one of their trainees, a grandmother who'd lost everything in a hurricane. Jackie beamed as she pulled a perfectly golden loaf from the oven, her hands steady and confident after 6 weeks of training. The bakery had transformed in ways Renee never imagined. Where there was once just a counter and display case, now stood a cozy cafe area with mismatched chairs and tables Eli had rescued from yard sales. Each piece told a story, just like the women who worked here. "The morning rush will be here soon," Eli said, coming up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him, savoring the quiet moment. He still wore the same worn work boots, still arrived before sunrise to check the ovens, but now he didn't hide when customers took pictures for social media. "Can you believe it's been 2 months?" Renee asked, watching another trainee, Sarah, carefully pipe frosting onto cinnamon rolls. Sarah had escaped an abusive marriage with nothing but her children and hope. Now she was their lead decorator, teaching other women the craft. "God's timing is perfect," Eli replied, kissing her temple. "Speaking of timing." Before he could finish, The bell above the door chimed. Pastor Joseph walked in, his kind face creased with concern. "Have you seen the morning news?" Renee's heart skipped. She grabbed the remote and turned on the small TV they kept in the corner for community announcements. The headline made her gasp. Local restaurant owners charged with fraud. There on the screen were Derek and Candace, being led out of their flashy new restaurant in handcuffs. The reporter's voice filled the quiet cafe. Derek and Candace Malone are facing multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement. Sources say they misappropriated investor funds and forged loan documents. "Oh, Lord," Renee whispered, sinking into a chair. The women gathered around her, protective and concerned. "They did it to themselves," Jackie said firmly, placing a comforting hand on Renee's shoulder. But Renee's mind was already spinning with memories. Derek's betrayal, Candace's smug face at the charity event, their attempts to humiliate her and Eli. Yet instead of satisfaction, she felt a deep, unexpected sadness. "I need to see them," she said suddenly. Eli knelt beside her chair. "Are you sure? You don't owe them anything." "I know." She touched his face gently. "But forgiveness isn't about what we owe. It's about what sets us free." The next day, Renee visited the county jail. Candace sat across from her, designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly maintained facade crumbling. "Why are you here?" Candace asked, her voice bitter. "Come to gloat?" "No." Renee's voice was soft but firm. "I came to tell you I forgive you. Both of you." Candace's eyes filled with tears. "How can you, after what we did?" "Because holding on to hate would poison everything good in my life." Renee reached across the table, touching her cousin's hand. "And because I remember the little girl who used to share her dolls with me when we were kids." They talked for an hour, really talked, for the first time in years. Candace confessed her jealousy, her desperate need to prove herself better. "You always had something I couldn't buy," she admitted. "People loved you for who you were, not what you had." When Renee left, her heart felt lighter. She drove to the chapel where she and Eli had first married, needing a quiet place to think. To her surprise, Eli's truck was already parked outside. She found him sitting with Pastor Joseph in the small garden, deep in conversation. They both stood when they saw her, and something in Eli's expression made her heart flutter. "I was going to wait," he said, taking her hands in his. "But seeing you today, choosing love over revenge, you remind me every day why I fell in love with you." He dropped to one knee, and Renee's eyes filled with tears. In his hand was a simple silver ring with a small pearl, nothing flashy or expensive, but perfect in its quiet beauty. "Renee Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me? Again? This time with no secrets between us?" She laughed through her tears. "We're already married. I want to do it right," he said, "in front of everyone we love, with nothing hidden. I want to tell the world how proud I am to be your husband." "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times yes. 2 weeks later, the chapel was filled with flowers and faces, their Hope Cafe family, regular customers who'd become friends, even Jackie's grandchildren as flower girls. Renee wore her original simple dress, but now it was adorned with hand-embroidered flowers sewn by her trainees. Pastor Joseph smiled at the gathered crowd. "Some might say these two are already married, but today they choose each other again, this time with eyes wide open and hearts fully known." Eli's voice shook as he repeated his vows. "I promise to always be honest, to love you for your heart rather than what you have, to build our life on truth and trust." Renee squeezed his hands. "I promise to see you for who you are, all of who you are, to love the man who fixes sinks and the man who changes lives, to trust that God's plan is bigger than our fears. By the power vested in me, Pastor Joseph said, beaming, I now pronounce you, once again and forevermore, husband and wife. Their kiss was sweet with tears and laughter, the chapel filled with cheers and applause. Outside, the summer sun painted everything gold, and the air smelled like fresh bread from Hope Cafe, where they'd host the reception. Ready to go home? Eli asked, helping her into his truck, the same one he'd driven when they first met. Renee looked at their gathered loved ones, at the chapel where their journey began, at the man who'd taught her that love sometimes comes disguised as something else entirely. I am home, she said, and kissed him again as the chapel bells rang out across the afternoon sky. 5 years had passed since that second wedding at the little chapel, and Sweet Grace Breads, now Hope Cafe, had blossomed into something beyond Renee's wildest dreams. The spring morning sun streamed through the cafe's wide windows, casting golden light across the worn wooden floors that had seen thousands of footsteps, each carrying their own story of hope. Inside, the air was rich with the aroma of fresh-baked bread and sweet vanilla. Renee stood at the main preparation table, surrounded by 6 young women in crisp aprons. Their faces showed different stages of concentration as they kneaded dough beneath their hands. Remember, ladies, Renee said, her voice warm and encouraging. Bread is like life. It needs time, patience, and the right balance. She demonstrated the proper kneading technique again, her experienced hands working the dough with practiced grace. Too rough, and you'll make it tough. Too gentle, and it won't develop properly. Maria, a single mother of 2 who'd joined the program 3 months ago, looked up from her slightly lopsided attempt. Ms. Renee, how do you make it look so easy? Renee smiled, moving to stand beside her. I've had years of practice, honey, and plenty of failures along the way. She guided Maria's hands with her own. See? Like this. Gentle but firm. Just like how you handle your business accounts. Through the large window that faced the garden, Renee could see Elijah tending to the herbs and vegetables they used in the cafe. He'd created the garden shortly after they'd renovated the place, insisting that fresh ingredients made all the difference. Now it was a flourishing green space that supplied not only their kitchen, but also provided fresh produce for local families in need. The morning sun highlighted the silver threading through his dark hair, and Renee's heart swelled with love watching him work. He was wearing old jeans and a faded t-shirt, looking more like the man she'd first met than the wealthy businessman he actually was. That was one of the things she loved most about him, how he never lost touch with who he was at his core. Through the open kitchen door she could hear children laughing on the patio. The cafe had become a gathering place for the community, where people from all walks of life came together over fresh bread and hot coffee. They'd installed a small playground last year, and it wasn't unusual to see business executives sharing tables with construction workers while their kids played together. Now, Renee turned back to her class, moving to the whiteboard they'd installed. While our bread rises, let's talk about profit margins. She picked up a marker and began writing numbers. Running a successful business isn't just about making good food. It's about understanding your numbers. The women leaned forward, taking notes. Each of them had a story, some escaping abusive relationships, others rebuilding after addiction or homelessness. Hope Cafe's training program gave them not just job skills, but a chance to reclaim their independence. Miss Jackie taught me this, Renee continued, referring to her old mentor who'd passed away 2 years ago. Your ingredients cost plus your time equals your base price, but you've got to factor in overhead. As she taught, she noticed Elijah coming in through the back door, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. He caught her eye and winked, moving quietly so as not to disturb the class. The same spark still flickered between them after all these years, a warm current of understanding and love that had only grown stronger with time. Later that afternoon, after the day's bread-making class had ended and the financial workshop was complete, Renee watched with pride as her students practiced their customer service skills during the afternoon rush. Maria was at the register, handling transactions with growing confidence. Sarah, who'd graduated from their program last year and now worked as their assistant manager, was training 2 new girls on the espresso machine. The cafe hummed with life, elderly couples sharing pastries, mothers with strollers meeting for coffee, business people typing on laptops while enjoying fresh sandwiches. Above them all, the hand-painted sign that had become their motto gleamed, "Where miracles are baked daily." As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the crowd thinned out. Renee stood at the counter, wiping down surfaces and taking stock of the day's sales. The kitchen was filled with the comforting scent of the last batch of bread baking in the ovens. Elijah appeared beside her, as he often did at this hour. His hands were clean now, but there was still a smudge of dirt on his cheek from the garden. Without a word, he reached out and gently brushed some flour from her face, his touch as tender as it had been on their first day together. "I thought I was testing love," he murmured, his voice soft with reflection. Renee looked up at him, seeing in his eyes all the years they'd shared, the challenges they'd overcome, the lives they'd touched, the love that had grown between them. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had become her home. "Turns out love was testing both of us," she replied, understanding in her voice. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from years of shared experiences and deep understanding. The sound mingled with the gentle hum of the ovens and the fading sunlight streaming through the windows. The door chime rang, one last customer coming in just before closing. Renee and Elijah turned together, their hands finding each other automatically, fingers entwining as naturally as breathing. On the counter between them, a fresh loaf of bread cooled on its rack, steam rising from its golden brown crust like a prayer of gratitude. The steam curled upward, catching the last rays of sunlight, a visible reminder of how warmth and love could transform the simplest ingredients into something miraculous. Their joined hands rested beside it, wedding rings glinting, as they prepared to welcome another soul into their sanctuary of hope. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.